The Brown Line is Chicago's third most used L line, which runs from the Loop to the northwest side at Kimball and Lawrence. Today, I'm going to rank all 27 of the line stations from worst to best. This is going to be entirely based on my opinion, but any objective metrics would likely give a similar ranking. So, without further ado, let's get started. Station number 27, the worst station on the Brown Line, is Western. While a functionally good station, Western is just so ugly. Not only is it rusting everywhere, but the actual design of the station is not aesthetically pleasing. While the CTA does have other boxy white stations, those stations can look alright, but the tan bricks at Western do not go well with the white at all. The station does have a small bus terminal, and it's in the middle of Lincoln Square, which is a nice walkable area. But my absolute favorite part of the station is the piece of the Berlin Wall in the mezzanine, which was donated in 2008. Despite all this, the station is just too ugly to like. There is, however, a plan to rehabilitate this station, and while it will obviously get rid of all the rust, the current hideous design will remain essentially unchanged. Station 26 is Clark and Lake. I've talked about Clark and Lake a couple times when ranking stations on other lines, but the main ideas are as follows. Clark and Lake is the primary transfer point between the Blue Line and the Loop lines. As a result, it's quite large and connects to the pedway and used to connect to the Thompson Center before it closed down. As a result of all this, the station has the second highest ridership in the system. The station does have a number of issues though. While both mezzanines that serve the elevated tracks have a nice appearance, the station is rather dirty and often smells. While crime used to be a significant problem at this station, crime across the CTA has gone down a lot recently, and Clark and Lake is no exception. Crime at Clark and Lake is not zero, but it is low enough that I don't consider it to detract from the station as much as it used to. Clark and Lake has two platforms, an underground platform serving the Blue Line and an elevated platform serving all lines in the Loop. I'm going to focus on the elevated platform since that's the one that serves the Brown Line. This platform is pretty basic, but it is functionally successful. The platforms are wide enough to support the station's high ridership. Station number 25 is State and Lake. The number one issue with State and Lake is the narrow platform. The station was built in 1895, and at that time, standards for platform width were essentially, can a person physically stand on it? So, of course, the platforms at this station are uncomfortably narrow. The center of the platforms was widened in 2016, but it wasn't enough. The station still gets quite crowded. In my opinion, the design of the station isn't terrible, but it certainly isn't an architectural marvel. The platforms are completely disconnected from each other with two dingy mezzanines on either platform. Fortunately, there is a plan to rebuild the station, making it wheelchair accessible and much more spacious. From the renderings, the new station looks great. It's going to have a glass canopy covering the entire platform, similar to Sir Mac McCormick Place on the Green Line. 24 is Harold Washington Library. I'm going to start off by saying that I actually really like the design of this station. The station was built along with the Harold Washington Library itself, and its design complements the library quite well. Even on its own, the station's green canopy and orange brick mezzanine look fantastic. The station's mezzanine is also directly below the tracks, allowing for an easy transfer between the two platforms. This is something that isn't too common with stations directly above the street, since it's often hard to fit a mezzanine in and still have clearance for road vehicles. The biggest problem with this station is what goes on just outside of it. The north side of Van Buren between State and Dearborn has become a hotspot for crime and drug dealing. Most of the time, there are 20 to 30 people either selling drugs or doing drugs, and violent crime is not uncommon. Don't be surprised if you get harassed as a passerby. While the CTA has done a good job of keeping all that activity out of the station itself, unless you enter at the south side of the street, you have to walk through it to get to the station. Station 23 is Addison. Addison has a red brick mezzanine and elevator shaft. The platform is covered by a short brown canopy, and it has a fence made of recycled metal. All features typical of Brown Line stations. There's also some nice artwork going up the elevator shaft for the northbound platform. The main problem with Addison is that there's no crosswalk in front of the mezzanine. If you're getting off an eastbound bus on Addison, in order to get into the station, you have to either jaywalk or walk down to Ravenswood and cross there, which is a pretty big inconvenience. If you're exiting the station, it's not as bad since there is an auxiliary exit on the south side of the street, but it's still an annoying problem. Number 22 is Washington and Wells. Washington and Wells doesn't have any major things wrong with it, but nothing is that great. The station opened in 1995 and has a pretty basic white design typical of that time. The platforms are sufficiently wide to handle the high ridership that the station receives, and the station is wheelchair accessible. Though I must say the canopy only covers a small part of the platform, so if there's a rainy day with particularly high ridership, a few people might get wet or be forced to wait in the mezzanine. Station number 21 is Adams and Wabash. Adams and Wabash is an old station, having opened in 1896. Though, unlike other old stations, the platforms at Adams and Wabash are quite wide and can easily handle the station's ridership. A lot of this likely has to do with the fact that the station was renovated in the late 60s, late 80s, and 2010. Most of the original infrastructure has actually been replaced at one point or another. My favorite part of the station is the crossover bridge, which has a great view and no windows, so you can film without any obstruction. The only real problem with the station is that the mezzanine can sometimes feel a little cramped. Now, station 20 is Montrose. Montrose is similar to Addison. Both stations were reconstructed at the same time and under the same construction contract, so both stations have the same basic design. Part of that basic design is the lack of a crosswalk from the mezzanine to the other side of the street. So similar to Addison, you either have to jaywalk or walk to Ravenswood and cross there. The reason I like Montrose a bit more is because the area around the station is more active. There are quite a few shops and restaurants along Montrose, whereas everything around Addison is residential. Station number 19 is Merchandise Mart. The main mezzanine is inside the station's namesake building, the Merchandise Mart. While I do like it when transit stations are directly connected to other buildings, at Merchandise Mart, it can be difficult to figure out how to get down to street level from the platform, and getting up to the platform from street level certainly isn't intuitive. As a result of this, the auxiliary entrances at Kinsey and Wells actually get more boardings than the main entrance. The singular turnstile per direction is definitely not enough to handle the traffic at these entrances, and the staircases can get backed up, especially after passengers alight. While the design of the station itself isn't that impressive, I do like the photography installation surrounding the walkway between the platforms. 18 is LaSalle and Van Buren. LaSalle and Van Buren is another old station. Unlike Adams and Wabash and Stained Lake, LaSalle and Van Buren has never had a proper renovation since it opened in 1897, so the station is rather historic. While the mezzanine hasn't been rebuilt since 1897, it has been painted completely white, so it still has lost some of its historical character. Between the platforms, there's a small walkway under the tracks, and while quite rickety, I still find it fun to walk on. Station 17 is Kimball. Kimball is the terminus of the line and is adjacent to the Kimball Yard. The station has 3 platforms with trains boarding and alighting at any platform available. Kimball has a rather basic design, with the only unique part being the pillars in front of the mezzanine on Lawrence that also act as seating. Kimball is another one of those stations that isn't great but isn't terrible, though I will say that the Kimball Yard is a bit too small. Before COVID, the yard didn't have enough capacity to store all the trains that ran on the Brown Line, so during rush hour, a few trains from the Orange Line's yard at Midway ran all the way from Midway to Kimball and back. The CTA has since cut service on the Brown Line to the point where this service pattern is no longer necessary, and now it only runs during special events. Number 16 is Irving Park. Irving Park's design is similar to Addison and Montrose, but the CTA decided that Irving Park was wide enough to actually install a crosswalk next to the mezzanine, so transferring from an eastbound bus is much easier to do here. The design of the station itself is certainly not bad, but it's not my favorite. I do need to point out the high quality mosaics in the mezzanine though. Number 15 is Armitage. The mezzanine at Armitage maintains the historic station house, but the station is essentially your average Brown Line station, which as you've seen, looks like this, or this. The canopies at Armitage, however, are different. On most Brown Line stations north of Belmont, the canopies are painted brown and have a sort of curved design, whereas most canopies on stations south of Belmont are primarily made of metal sheets and have a straighter, more geometric design. I prefer the look of the curved canopies, even though they cover a lesser percentage of the platform. The most unique thing about this station is the photography installation in the mezzanine. In 2007, an artist interviewed passengers at the station asking them about a story from their life. He then photographed a relevant location to each story and compiled the photographs and stories onto the wall at the back of the mezzanine. Similar to Addison and Montrose, this station lacks a crosswalk in front of the mezzanine. So if you're getting off an eastbound 73 bus, you're gonna have an inconvenient time getting into the station. I'm ultimately putting Armitage above Addison, Montrose, and even Irving Park, primarily because of that photography piece, but also because the area around Armitage is vibrant with boutique shopping and cafes. Station 14 is Diversey. I really like Diversey's mezzanine. While the station has a similar design to most other Brown Line stations, the mezzanine incorporates a lot more red brick, and I like the diagonal fare gates and diagonal quarters leading to the staircase. One unique thing about the station is that the elevated structure over Diversey Parkway is painted bright yellow. The structure has garnered a bit of dust since it was painted in, I believe, 2022, but it still maintains its character. There's also a bright yellow model of the station's original attendant booth on the north side of Diversey Parkway. The big issue with the station is the crosswalk problem. It's the same situation as all the other stations. No crosswalk in front of the mezzanine and inconvenient transfers from buses. Now with number 13, we're getting into stations that I legitimately like. The Brown Line has a lot of good stations, so even though we're only halfway done, I won't be complaining so much. Anyway, Station 13 is Wellington. Wellington is a typical Brown Line station with the red brick mezzanine and the canopies and platform fence typical of Brown Line stations. The station has beautiful looking figures of different colors across the glass of the mezzanine. The one problem with the station is that a good portion of the northbound platform is pretty narrow because it's obstructed by a parking lot, of all things. Though, at the end of the day, the rest of the platform is adequately wide, so that narrow spot isn't that big of a problem. Station 12 is Belmont. Another good station. Belmont is the northern transfer point between the red, purple, and brown lines, serving all 4 tracks on the north side main line. Based on estimated figures for cross-platform transfers, Belmont may very well have the highest ridership in the system, higher than any station in the loop. To accommodate this large number of people, the platforms are decently wide. The station was reconstructed in the late 2000s, so it includes all modern amenities. The mezzanine is also quite large and houses nice mosaics of eyes and faces on pillars and the back wall next to the staircase. One inconvenience of this station is that there are emergency exits that lead down to Fletcher, which could be another access point, so they really should be proper auxiliary exits. 11 is Fullerton. Fullerton is almost identical to Belmont in its design. The one difference is that the westernmost track is completely straight when entering the station, while the 3 other tracks shift to give way for the wider platforms. At Belmont, all 4 tracks shift slightly. Fullerton obviously also has different artwork than Belmont. In the main mezzanine, there are some stone carvings and a pretty basic but still nice looking landscape mosaic. Station number 10 is Kedzie. Kedzie is one of the 4 stations where the Brown Line is at grade, so you have a railroad crossing right at the station. Kedzie's design is quite high quality. I like the tall, rounded mezzanine, which has space for bike parking. The platform has some interesting seating with sets of 3 stools at different heights. There is also some interesting looking artwork on some of the windows in the mezzanine. One thing with this station is that it's extremely close to Kimball. The auxiliary entrance at Spalding is only a 5-minute walk from Kimball. Though, since both stations have significant ridership and Kedzie serves a busy commercial quarter, consolidation of the 2 stations seems unlikely without an extension of the Brown Line. While not an official CTA plan, there is a lot of talk about extending the Brown Line west to Jefferson Park to connect with the Blue Line. If this were to happen, the current Kimball station would have to be demolished, and at that point, it would make sense to consolidate the 2 stations. Station 9 is Sedgwick. Sedgwick is another regular Brown Line station, but it incorporates mostly green and blue brick rather than red brick into its design. The station house has also maintained its original design from the opening of the North Side Main Line in 1900, and there's a nice mosaic inside. This part of the North Side Main Line used to have 4 tracks, and Sedgwick used to be a double island platform serving all 4 tracks. When the outer tracks were removed, the station was reconstructed and the island platforms were turned into side platforms. The canopies kept their previous shape and position. As a result, the canopy is not connected to the back wall of the platform, so you have a little bit of a gap. This is a bit of an issue because the bench that should be under the canopy is actually mostly under the gap. So if it's raining or has just rained, the bench is going to get wet. But at the end of the day, that's a pretty minor thing. Another pretty minor inconvenience is the crosswalk problem, as there's no crosswalk directly in front of the station. This isn't so much of a problem because not that many people transfer to the 37 on Sedgwick. Number 8 is Southport. Southport has a typical Brown Line station design and a nice appearance, though the station also has a few unique features. Southport is the only station on the system where the elevator shafts are rotated 45 degrees relative to the platforms. The mezzanine has a couple of abstract pieces of artwork and a direct connection to a small grocery store. The area around this station also has a notably high amount of businesses and foot traffic. Station number 7 is Chicago Avenue. Chicago is the only station on the Brown Line outside of the loop, where the north and southbound platforms are completely disconnected. The only real inconvenience with this is that you have to make sure you're going up to the right platform. It's easy to miss the fact that you can't access all trains from a single entrance. While the stairs do say the destinations of trains that entrance serves, the signage could be more explicit. While Chicago was rebuilt in 2006 under the same project as most other Brown Line stations, its design is rather unique. Both mezzanines and auxiliary entrances are surrounded in metal mesh panels, which look pretty interesting. My favorite design elements are the elevator shafts. The light blue glass and orange tiles work well together. I particularly like the triangular peaks of the glass at the top of the elevator shaft. The station also has an art installation of metal panels that blow in the wind. The view is another positive thing about this station. The station is surrounded by a lot of nice looking high-rises, and to the north you get a pretty good view of high-rises in the rapidly developing area just east of the former Cabrini Green housing project. Station 6 is Rockwell. Rockwell is another at-grade station, so it has a railroad crossing in front of it. The design of the station is similar to Kedzie, with the same round-roofed mezzanine and the stools at different heights. The mezzanine at Rockwell has a beautiful art installation, with numerous photographs of bodies of water printed on stained glass, all surrounded by a frame made of logs. One thing I'm really fond of is when rail stations attract commercial development on a street that would otherwise be completely residential. Rockwell is certainly one of these stations, with a significant amount of businesses on Rockwell within a block of the station. Number 5 is Damon. Damon has a rather modern-looking mezzanine with a multitude of glass panels surrounded by a dark green border. Part of the mezzanine also maintains the original station house. Inside the station house, there are a number of chairs and benches made of metal castings of suitcases and other travel bags. At platform level, the station isn't that unique. It has the same design as most other Brown Line stations north of Belmont. Damon is another station with the crosswalk issue. Though, the nearest intersection isn't that far from the station, and the 50, the bus on Damon, stops at the intersection as opposed to right in front of the station, so the walk to the station entrance is a bit shorter. Number 4 is Paulina. Paulina is located at the intersection of Lincoln, Roscoe, and Paulina, which is quite an active area with lots of shops and restaurants. The thing that makes this station great are the entrances. The main mezzanine has a high ceiling with a nice rounded roof. There's also a hanging sculpture and a mosaic on the back wall. The auxiliary entrance is arguably even better. From the street Paulina, you have a little walkway leading to the entrance itself, called the Lakeview Low Line. The walkway is surrounded by bright yellow sculptures, some in the shape of tables and chairs, and others in other less identifiable shapes. Station 3 is Quincy. While having been recently renovated, Quincy has maintained its full historical character. Beyond modern necessary amenities like fare gates, elevators, and security cameras, everything looks how it did when the station first opened in 1895. The mezzanine, the platform, the signage, everything. The station was restored to this look in 1985 after the loop was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and it was ordered that one of the stations was to retain its historical character. The station has a map from the 1930s and even advertisements from the early 20th century. I will say that parts of the platform are quite narrow, but hey, I guess it's just part of the historical character. Station number 2 is Washington and Wabash. Washington and Wabash is the newest station in the loop and the second newest station in the system, having opened in 2018. The best part of the station is definitely the canopy, which is absolutely magnificent and definitely the most recognizable feature of the station. In addition to the canopy, the fence surrounding the platform has a unique wavy design. Washington and Wabash is also one of the stations directly over a street, where they managed to squeeze in the mezzanine below the platform, so you don't need a crossover bridge or 2 mezzanines for each platform. Inside the mezzanine, there's also a colorful, almost floor-to-ceiling art installation. Now, station number 1, the best station on the Brown Line, is Francisco. Francisco is another at-grade station with railroad crossings, though a few things make it much better than the others. The first, and in my opinion best thing about the station, is the mosaic walkway leading up to the mezzanine from the street. Not only is the walkway artfully decorated, but it's surrounded by plants which make it look that much better. The station house is also a preserved version of the original station house, and I like it quite a lot, especially the cylindrical lights on the side under the roof overhang. The station also has historic turnstiles. They don't do anything, they just spin and allow you to go around the station house instead of through it. The actual fare gates are on the other side of the station house. The platform itself is pretty similar to those of Kedzie and Rockwell. Also similar to Rockwell, Francisco has spurred a little bit of commercial development at Francisco and Manor, which would otherwise be completely residential. Beyond this, Francisco primarily serves single-family homes and actually has the lowest ridership on the Brown Line. But obviously, that doesn't detract from the quality of the station.